Hi, my name is Lorena Cermeño Sarmiento, and I'm talking about from Euthanasia. First of all, what is the euthanasia? As euthanasia is an action of the doctor who deliberately causes the death of the patient. It is the good death, but from this a science fiction or medical point of view, it is much more. Euthanasia is the process of hastening the death of a person with an incurable diseases to prevent surviving. In euthanasia, it is always a medical team that administers the drugs to the person who wishes to die. Euthanasia involves the direct intervention of a doctor to hasten the death of the patient. And in assisted suicide, it is the patient himself who ends his life, and the terminal sedation relieves pain in the final moment to the patient. In Mexico, euthanasia is provided in the federal penal code. The Mexican constitutional does not provide in euthanasia. The one does in the general health law. The federal penal code considers a person who assigns another person to commit suicide a crime and punishing him with up the 5 years in a prison. There is an article 4 in the Constitution which says everyone has right to define life and consequently to define it death. The law will establish the norms to regulate the recognitions of the seconds. Some countries where it is later, first of all, is Colombia. Colombia also has a figure called freedom, consequences that allows doctors not to perform to the procedure if it goes against their personal beliefs. Other is Spain. Spain, as in many of the other countries where it was approved before, Spain will authorize it. It used only to people suffering from a serious and incurable diseases or a serious chronic and an incapacitation condition that causes intolerable and surviving. Netherlands is the first country to approve it. In the Netherlands, approves plans to the euthanasia children under 12 years old. A doctor who euthanasian a patient with Alzheimer is acquired in the Netherlands. Next is Belgium. Belgium becomes the first country to the euthanasia a minor. Luxembourg is that terminally ill patients have the option of requesting the procedure after receiving approval from 2 physicians and a panel of experts. Canada is the country establishes strict requirements which range from requesting the procedure 10 days before it is put into practice. The presence of 2 independent witness and the approval of 2 doctors who must confirm that the patient has no cure and is an advanced stage. In New Zealand, euthanasia applications must be 18 years old and required the approval of two physicians. What is the assisted suicide? In assisted suicide, instead of a doctor, it is the person who wishes to die who ends his life by taking a little drug without the risk that these tenants. Are you for or against? I am against. And since a person decides to live, if they which also if a minor, they still do not what they want, and they have a long time to live. If the world gave you your life, it is for something, and you desire to be in it, and in which I agree is assisted suicide. Since if a person who has a very serious illness and who cannot depend on himself, or is a degeneration diseases, is surviving or becoming more serious. It is in this case, I agree. Science for me that is no longer alive, because they take away your desire for what life offers, and it is a very complicated stage. I think that the person is surviving or going through some diseases, and I aware of what he knows he is doing it, knows that there is no other way he can do it if only he desires. And then, and this is a video that I will post below that talks, and more depend about the euthanasia and many positions on it. Okay.
Physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia frequently asked questions. Question 2. In a society where we place high value on freedom and individual choice, why don't we allow people to choose the time and manner of their death? The notion that assisted suicide or voluntary euthanasia should be left up to individual choice is instinctively compelling to us. After all, what right do we have to tell someone how to live or die? In order to understand the pitfalls of this line of reasoning, we need to begin by analyzing how people make decisions. Decades of research into the psychology of persuasion and how we make decisions has given us valuable insights into the complex factors involved in what we call choice. While we don't know everything about how or why we make certain decisions, we do know that our choices are not 100% autonomous, but rather are highly influenced by outside forces. As for how this could play out if assisted suicide becomes legal and acceptable in Canada, take the case of Catherine Judson, a resident of Oregon, where assisted suicide has been legal for over 15 years. Her husband had an incurable condition and was visiting a physician for an exam. During the exam, Catherine overheard her husband receiving, in her own words, a sales pitch for assisted suicide. The doctor pressed her husband. "Think of what it will spare your wife." "We need to think of her," he argued. Subtle influences, and in this case, not so subtle influences, can have a real impact on what choices we make, especially when they come from trusted authorities like physicians. In this case, his wife overheard, immediately removed her husband from the situation, and the two of them enjoyed 5 more years together. Had Catherine been absent from this situation, it is quite possible the physician would have succeeded in persuading this man to end his life. Catherine's example is not extraordinary. As our population ages, we have become very well acquainted with the phenomenon of elder abuse. We now know that elderly individuals are uniquely susceptible to outside pressures and are routinely taken advantage of by caregivers and loved ones. When suicide becomes a socially acceptable way to end one's life, how will we protect seniors, especially those who already feel like they are a burden, from feeling obligated to die and being pressured into an untimely assisted death? And it's not only our dependent seniors who will find themselves in a much more vulnerable position. Take the example of Belgian man Tom Mortier. In 2012, he received a message at work informing him that his 64-year-old mother had been granted a medically assisted death the previous day. Tom was horrified and confused. He never dreamt his mother would be a candidate for assisted dying because she was in perfect physical health, but he was wrong. Her mental health, in this case, a severe depression, was all the justification the physicians needed to grant her request to die. Instead of treating his depressed, suicidal mother, the physician helped her end her life, and what he did was no different than pushing a suicidal jumper off a bridge. Technically, it was her choice, but sometimes not having a choice can actually protect us from ourselves. These two real-life examples illustrate the complex factors involved in so-called individual choice, and the very real pitfalls inherent in changing attitudes and laws to permit assisted suicide and euthanasia in Canada. Taylor Hyatt is a young disabled student at Carleton University in Ontario, and she knows the hazards in this line of thinking all too well. Her insights in this matter are instructive. Rather than focusing on dying with dignity, she says, society should make sure that equal opportunities to thrive and live with dignity are the first option presented. When death is presented as a viable alternative to living, those with disabilities will invariably be more vulnerable to that option. Our choices have profound consequences on others, and in the case of physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, those consequences could be lethal. Want to know more? Visit www.advocatelife.com.
And finish my conclusion. This work helped me learn more about euthanasia and what is it entails. It is deliberate intervention to end a life with no prospect of cure. Euthanasia is practiced both in humans, in medicine, and in animals of other species. And this is my presentation from the euthanasia. Thanks.